On a quiet street in Westminster, Colorado, life moved in a pattern that felt safe because it was familiar. The same houses, the same sidewalks, the same short walk to Chelsea Park. The same school bell waiting at Witt Elementary. Jessica Ridgeway fit perfectly inside that routine. She was 10 years old in fifth grade, living with her mom, her grandma, and her aunt. Her parents, Sarah and Jeremiah, had been apart for years, and her dad lived in Missouri. Even with the tension that can come with child support and custody, Jessica still held on to both parents in a way that looked steady from the outside. The kind of child who did not make adults nervous, the kind who made them think she will be fine. At school, Jessica was the student teachers remembered without trying, joyful, smiley, the first to raise her hand, the first to start a conversation when someone new looked alone. She loved learning, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. At home, she made up dance routines and little songs like the world was a stage built just for her. She watched shows like Victorious and Wizards of Waverly Place. She had that bright, stubborn enthusiasm where she would keep trying at something until it finally worked. In a way that matters now, Jessica also wanted to grow up a little. She had asked for an alarm clock so she could wake herself and feel independent. It was a small step, but it meant something to her. The kind of detail that later turned sharp in the mind because it happened right before everything changed. The morning of October 5th, 2012 was cold and snowy. Jessica was up at 7:45, right on time for the routine she had built. She watched TV. She ate a granola bar. She got dressed. She peeled an orange with her mom to take to school. Then she bundled into a thick coat, said goodbye, and stepped out the front door on foot. She was supposed to meet her friends at their usual spot at Chelsea Park, about a 5-minute walk away, and then the group would go on to Witt Elementary together. It was ordinary enough that it barely felt like a decision. Just a normal morning in a normal neighborhood with a normal child doing what she had done before. But Jessica did not show up. Her friends waited as long as they could, without risking the bell. They carried on without her, the way kids sometimes do when something feels off, but not off enough to stop the world. A person can live their whole life never realizing how often the worst day begins with someone thinking, she is probably fine. Jessica was never late. She rarely missed school. She loved it, so the absence did not sit quietly. By 10:00 a.m., her teachers tried to reach Sarah, but Sarah worked nights, a 10 a.m. to 7:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. shift. After watching Jessica leave that morning, she had gone to sleep. The phone rang. The voicemail was left. And for hours, the day kept moving without her knowing that something had already broken. At around 4:30 p.m., Sarah heard the message. In that moment, the mind tries to protect itself. There had to be a mistake. Maybe Jessica went to the wrong place. Maybe she got turned around. Maybe she was with a friend. Sarah drove past the park. She went to the school. She went to houses where Jessica might have gone. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. The usual explanations did not appear. Soon, Sarah called for help and said the words, "No parent expects to say out loud." Her daughter never made it to school. An Amber Alert went out that night. The neighborhood changed in real time. Streets that felt predictable started to feel like a maze. Houses that had always blended into the background suddenly looked like places where anything could have happened behind a closed door. Search teams gathered. Officers poured in. Firefighters moved through the cold using thermal imaging equipment. Lights were set up around Chelsea Park, cutting into the darkness, trying to make night behave like day. A helicopter with night vision was wanted, but the weather was too cold for safe flight. Blades could ice up. Even the sky felt closed. The search kept pushing anyway. People combed through yards, gardens, open spaces, creeks, and wooded areas. Volunteers flooded in because when a child is missing, almost everyone becomes the same person inside, a person who cannot sit still. A person who keeps thinking, if I help, maybe I can undo this. The community became a map of effort. Guards stood at crosswalks. Cars entering and leaving were photographed. Ribbons appeared, many of them purple, Jessica's favorite color, tied around mailboxes and trees like a promise the neighborhood was trying to keep. Inside her home, there were the ordinary signs of a life still in progress. On her desk, her notebook sat with homework. On one page, she had written reminders about not playing at the park alone and being careful around strangers. That detail landed hard. Jessica was not described as reckless. She was not the child who wandered off with ease. She was cautious, wary, careful. So the story did not naturally fit the comforting version where she simply got lost and turned up somewhere safe. It pointed toward something else. Either someone she trusted got close enough to guide her away, or someone moved fast and took choice away from her before she could react. The kind of taking that leaves no room for a scream to become a rescue. The search widened. Multiple agencies joined. Tips poured in. Thousands of them. DNA samples were taken in the hundreds. Homes were searched. Open land was covered again and again. The first 24 hours passed. Then the second day. Then the third. Time started to feel like an enemy. 4 days after Jessica disappeared, her family left the house for the first time to face cameras in the outside world. Even then, the neighborhood was still full of movement and fear. Everyone wanted Jessica found alive. But the longer it went, the more people began carrying a second thought they did not want to admit, even to themselves. There is a moment in cases like this when hope becomes both necessary and painful. Necessary because giving up feels like betrayal. Painful because hope can stretch and stretch until it turns into a kind of exhaustion. Then something surfaced miles away. In Superior, about 6.5 miles from Jessica's neighborhood, a man found a backpack. Along with it were her glasses, a water bottle, and clothing that smelled of urine. The backpack had a keychain with the name Jessica on it, but at first he did not connect it to the missing child whose face had filled screens and flyers. He posted online, casually, asking if anyone had lost it, telling whoever it belonged to come get it. Someone else made the connection. The call went in. The backpack became evidence. For Sarah, it felt like a sliver of hope. If something truly terrible had already happened, why would a backpack just be left like that? The mind does this. It tries to build a ladder out of whatever it can grab. But the next discovery did not build a ladder. It cut one down. In Arvada, a Denver suburb, maintenance workers found a heavy bag on the side of the road. They did not open it. They called it in. Inside was a small torso. Testing confirmed it belonged to Jessica. Parts of her were still missing. A clear cause of death had not been established at first, and in the details that followed, one object stood out, strange and unsettling in a way that refused to fade. A wooden cross was found associated with the scene. The exact placement was not publicly pinned down in a single clean statement, and that uncertainty became part of the horror. Whether it was near her remains or placed with her, it was treated as pivotal. In the neighborhood, grief did not look calm. It looked like candles and crowds and purple in faces that did not know where to put their anger. It looked like parents holding their children tighter while also trying not to let those children see that the world had shifted. This is where people tend to split into two instincts. One instinct says it must have been someone she knew, someone familiar enough to lower her guard, someone who could speak her name without it sounding wrong. The other instinct says it was a stranger, a predator moving through ordinary places, hunting for a moment when no one was watching. Both instincts feel true because both are terrifying, and because the mind wants a rule it can follow afterward, something that would make it make sense, something that would make it preventable. As the case pressed forward, a connection began to form to something that happened months earlier. On Memorial Day, 4 months before Jessica disappeared, a jogger had been attacked near Katner Lake. A man came from behind, shoved a chloroform-soaked cloth at her face, and dragged her toward bushes. She escaped. The description was limited: a white male, average build around 5'6" to 5'8", based on her height and proximity in the struggle. It was close to where Jessica was believed to have been taken. And later, the DNA from that attack matched DNA tied to Jessica's case. The same attacker. That single fact changed the temperature of everything. It meant the person who took Jessica had tried before. It meant the neighborhood was not dealing with an unthinkable one-time event. It meant someone had practiced. Someone had tested a method. Someone had failed once and adjusted. The question became less about what happened and more about who could do it, then return to normal life after. Search efforts shifted into a different kind of hunt. Sex offender lists were reviewed. Cell tower data around key locations was examined for overlap. People were urged to pay attention to behavioral changes around them. Not just strangers, but neighbors, friends, relatives. Someone who suddenly shaved, someone who changed hair, someone who stopped parking a car the usual way, someone whose mood shifted in the days after October 5th. Because the hardest part to accept was this. The person did not look like a monster to everyone. Monsters that are obvious are easier to stop. Monsters that blend in are the ones that leave communities questioning their own instincts. As memorials were held, thousands dressed in purple. Jessica's favorite music played. Videos of her life, her smile, her cheerfulness made the loss feel even sharper. People who had never met her stood beside people who had, united by the same sick awareness that this could have been any child in any neighborhood. And then a small piece of evidence began to point toward a specific person. A photo of a cross necklace circulated. Someone recognized it, not from the internet, not from a distant tip line rumor, but from nearby life. From a nearby life. The concern centered on a teenager in the area, Austin Sig. He was 17 years old. He lived with his mother, Mindy. People around him had noticed things over time, a fascination with death, an interest in decaying bodies, human and animal. The kind of interest that some people dismiss as dark curiosity until it is too late to dismiss anything. Austin was approached. He gave a DNA sample. He said he had been home sleeping when Jessica disappeared. He wore a similar cross. For a time, the process moved on, pulled in 1,000 directions by tips and samples and the noise of urgency. Then something went wrong in a way that would haunt the case later. His sample was handled as if it had been tested and cleared, even though it had not been. An envelope came back empty, a signal normally used to indicate no match, and the investigation moved forward under the impression he was not the one. In late October, a story began circulating publicly about the DNA link between Jessica and the earlier Lake attack. That day, Austin told classmates he felt sick, wobbly, unsteady. He slept in his mother's bed that night, like a child trying to crawl back into an earlier version of himself. The next morning, Austin told Mindy he had something to tell her. Mindy knew before she knew. The words did not have to fully form for the fear to take shape. She asked if it was about Jessica. When Austin confirmed it, Mindy collapsed to the floor. Mindy agreed, and something brutal and clear rose up in her. The only way forward was to call. Austin asked her to do it for him. This is one of those moments people argue about in quiet rooms later. Some see a mother choosing truth over loyalty. Others see a mother forced into the worst possible choice because her loyalty was already destroyed the moment she learned what her son had done. Either way, the call went through. Officers arrived. Austin was taken in. 19 days after Jessica vanished, Austin sat in an interview room and admitted what he had done. He admitted that the jogger attack near Katner Lake was him, and that he had made his own chloroform. When that earlier attack failed, it did not scare him into stopping. It reshaped his target. He decided he needed someone smaller, someone easier to overpower. He did not know Jessica. He had not seen her before. He did not choose her because of who she was. That detail has its own cruelty. It means her safety was not tied to whether she was careful. It was tied to whether a predator crossed her path at the wrong second. On October 5th, he watched her in the snow. He watched her making snowballs. He parked his Jeep where he thought he could not be spotted. He waited for the moment she had to cross the street. He lowered himself so she would not see him inside the vehicle. As she passed, he grabbed her, pulled her inside, and restrained her with zip ties. There was no one around to hear her for long. He drove her to his house. Jessica asked who he was. She asked if he knew her mom. She kept asking questions because that is what children do when they are trying to find a handle on fear. He answered and lied, telling her things would be okay, telling her she would go home. At his house, he claimed he tried to calm her with cartoons. He said she had wet herself. He made her change clothes. He gave her a white shirt and black shorts. He cut her hair. He told her to turn away from him. Then he strangled her. He admitted that when he grabbed her, he was driven by a sexual impulse, but he insisted he did not sexually assault her. Later charges and evidence pulled at that insistence because the picture formed by his behavior and what was found on his devices did not sit comfortably beside his denial. This became one of the quiet contradictions in the case, the kind that leaves people deciding for themselves which version sounds more like the truth. What happened after her death revealed something even colder. Austin dismembered her in a bathtub. He placed her torso into bags and hid it for a time. He later moved her remains. He described identifying organs and handling the body in a way he connected to a forensic science class. He talked about successful serial killers as those who could make a body disappear, as if he were studying an ugly craft rather than dealing with a real child who had loved school, music, and purple ribbons. He kept other parts of her remains in a crawl space under his house. He attempted to dispose of tissue through plumbing. Human tissue was later recovered in the home's plumbing, confirming that the toilet was part of his disposal attempt. The most brutal facts settled into place. Jessica was dead before the full search even began. Hours into the interview, another failure came to light. Austin's original DNA sample had not been tested. It had been lost. The empty envelope that suggested he had been cleared was a mistake. A new test was ordered immediately. His DNA matched the sample connected to the jogger attack in Jessica. The GP used was searched. Broken zip ties were found inside. In the weeks after, as the case moved toward court, parts of Austin's history became clearer. He had a long fascination with death. He wanted to be a mortician. He took community college classes connected to mortuary science and an easel. He admitted an addiction to child abuse material that began when he was around 12. He described himself as sexually disturbed, drawn to violent content, and said the progression into more extreme material happened slowly enough that he did not always recognize how far he had gone. His parents had divorced years earlier. They had tried to help him. He had seen a faith-based counselor. His doctors urged his father to control his access to television and computers. None of it stopped the obsession from growing. People who knew him described a teenager who was smart but isolated, awkward, sometimes talking to himself, someone who made others uneasy in ways they could not fully explain. Some neighbors later admitted they had felt something was off long before Jessica disappeared, but they did not know what to do with that feeling. It is easy, after the truth is known, to look back and rearrange every odd moment into a warning sign. It is harder to live in the moment when every neighborhood has at least one strange kid and most of them do not become killers. Austin was charged as an adult. The list of counts was long: murder, kidnapping, and additional charges connected to sexual exploitation material found on his devices. In the jogger case, attempted murder, attempted kidnapping, and attempted sexual assault charges followed. And then came another contradiction that shook people who believed confession always equals closure. Austin entered a not guilty plea. For many, it felt like an insult layered on top of grief. He had admitted detailed actions. Jessica's remains had been found in his home. Yet the legal posture moved forward as if the fight would play out in full in a courtroom with every detail aired. This became a second debate people could not stop having. One viewpoint held that the not guilty plea was a strategy, a placeholder, a legal position that could shift. The other viewpoint held that it was one more act of control, a refusal to give the family even the clean certainty of a quick conclusion. Because of his age, Austin could not face the death penalty, but the stakes were still permanent. A conviction could mean life in prison, with the possibility of parole decades later, unless other sentencing structures removed that path. In the months leading to trial, arguments formed around Austin's mind and his responsibility. Some leaned toward an explanation rooted in mental health, developmental issues, family instability, and a life shaped by darker habits. It is a viewpoint that tries to believe something went wrong, because believing something went wrong implies it could be prevented in someone else. Others lean toward premeditation, pointing to the planning behind homemade chloroform, the searches for abduction-related information, and the way his choices changed after his earlier failed attack. This viewpoint challenges a common assumption people cling to, that a teenager is automatically impulsive, automatically redeemable, automatically someone who will grow out of it. In late 2013, almost a year after Jessica disappeared, and just days before trial was set to begin, Austin pleaded guilty to 15 charges. These included first-degree murder, sexual assault of a minor, kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and sexual exploitation of a minor. There was no deal that softened the consequences. He received life in prison for the murder charge, plus 86 consecutive years for other crimes. The structure of the sentence eliminated any realistic chance of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. In court, Austin showed little emotion. He did not address the judge. The silence from him became its own kind of statement, whether it was emptiness, detachment, or something else no one could fully name. For Sarah and Jessica's family, the sentencing did not restore what was taken. It simply closed the open door of uncertainty. There would be no stranger out there still unknown. There would be no question of whether the neighborhood was still being watched by the same predator. The name and the face were finally locked to the crime. Mindy, the mother who made the call, did not escape the aftermath. She lived with a kind of guilt that did not come from direct involvement, but from the unbearable fact of having brought a killer into the world. She did not second guess turning him in. She entered therapy. She stopped speaking to her son. She believed she would not get the truth from him anyway, and she could not survive being lied to. Jessica's family held a complicated compassion for Mindy. Not the same loss, not the same wound, but still a loss. Still a mother whose child was gone in a different way. In Westminster, Jessica did not vanish into a case file. Her memory transformed the neighborhood. Memorial Playground was built, filled with purple, with details made to reflect the child she had been. The Lassie Project was created as a free service that could notify an entire local community within seconds when a child went missing. A cheer camp was set up in her name because Jessica had told her mom she wanted to be a cheerleader, and she promised she would be kind to everyone when she was old enough. Years later, Sarah welcomed another daughter, Anna. Jessica was not replaced. The family described it as expanded. Purple remained everywhere, threaded through the house like a soft refusal to let time erase her. They continued to speak her name. They continued to talk about her as present, not as a memory sealed away. And still, the core truth of October 5th stayed sharp. Jessica woke up on a snowy morning, proud of her independence, holding an orange she peeled with her mom, stepping into a routine she trusted. She never reached her friends at Chelsea Park. She never reached Witt Elementary. She never came back through the same front door. The neighborhood learned in the hardest possible way that safety is not always a feeling you can trust. Sometimes it is just a habit. And when that habit breaks, the world does not break loudly at first. It breaks quietly in missed footsteps in an empty place where a child should have been, and in the time it takes for a sleeping phone to ring unanswered.